Welcome to Streamlining Assessment, a guide to optimizing controls and building common control framework session. Uh, this is just a high level agenda of what this session is going to be about. There's going to be introduction, security compliance assessment, what is common control framework, why is it important, steps to building it, benefits, limitation, and conclusion. So, goal from this session is to give you an idea of how you can build a common control framework at your organization or for your product, understanding what security compliance assessment means, what it is, how it is done, where does common control come in play, how to build it, and some examples related to it. So I'll start with my introduction. My name is Mukta. I'm currently working as Senior IT Compliance Analyst with Intercontinental Exchange, which is a parent company of New York Stock Exchange. I'm based out of Dallas, Virginia, which is a city very close to Washington, D.C. I started my career as technology consultant with PwC, where my primary responsibility was to assess infrastructures, security risk, map it to NIST 80053 framework, and recommend solutions that will help my clients mitigate the risk associated with it. After doing that for some time, I moved to internal audit, and I was with internal audit domain while working with PayPal and Yahoo, where my primary responsibility was to use a risk based approach to assess technical and information security risk. After doing that for 4 years, I slightly moved to a different role, which was security and privacy program manager, because I wanted to gain experience on the management side also. So there I worked on maintaining the internally designed assessment framework that enable products to meet major industry standard attestation like SOC, ISO, PCI, FedRAMP, and there are multiple compliance programs that were supported. Also, I developed a roadmap to deliver customer demand assessments on time. From there, now I've moved into a role which is with New York Stock Exchange, and here I primarily lead assessment that are related to regulation SCI, which is mandated by SEC, monitor compliance for it, as well as do review of code bugs for compliance impact. So I have experience both the side of cybersecurity, tech, and the non-tech side, and always in the mode of learning. So moving on to the next one, this is a disclaimer. I just want to read it before we dive deep into streamlining assessments session. So the views expressed in this conference are solely my own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of any organization with which I am affiliated. Any information provided herein is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as representing the views or opinions of my employer or any other affiliated organization. I'm sorry, I have to read it as it is just to make sure that I'm covering myself. So, moving on to the next slide, security compliance assessment. Now, let's break down each word in it: security, compliance, and then comes assessment. Now, a big debate that you will keep hearing about is security versus compliance. Which one gets the more important factor when it comes in deciding security goals? My opinion is different. I don't consider security or compliance in terms of superiority. I see them as complementing each other. Definitely, compliance is not equal to security, but it is compliance and security. The reason why I'm saying this is because without compliance framework, it would be very difficult to start assessing the security posture of your organization. Hence, they complement each other. Other essential thing that is very important is striking balance between the two. I believe compliance requirements enable us in meeting the desired security posture. While security is making and operating things protectively, compliance is checking, structuring, and verifying what it takes to do that. So, in short, you can say compliance is a security controls enabler. Neither of two are superior to each other, but they complement each other. So, once we resolve this debate of who is more greater, we know what it means. It means complementing each other. So the next is poll session. So I want to ask my audience, do you come from background of doing any kind of assessment, just so that I can improvise on my session as we go? I'm going to launch that poll. Just give me a second. This is my first time launching a poll, so curious to know what responses am I going to get. You know answers? Nobody wants to answer an answer. Okay, two answers, right? Three. Okay. I'll just give another 10, 20 seconds just to get an idea, and then I'll close poll. Four answers. Okay. All right. One, two, three, four, five. I'll close poll. Mm, It's processing poll results, and I'll come to know in seconds what my audience is expecting. There are a couple of poll questions that will be coming in this session. My goal is to keep it interactive so that audience also gets to learn from it and they are able to apply this when they go back in their respective roles. Okay, while the poll is closed, I'm not able to see what was answered. Uh, Unfortunately, I'm not able to see what was answered over here. So I will basically move on to the next slide and keep it very simple and explain to you what cyber security compliance assessment means. So you must have heard some common type of assessment like third party assessment or vendor assessment, which is analysis of risk that you do on third parties to see if they are introducing any risk in your organization. You send them a set of questionnaire, they fill out, then you verify, you evaluate, and understand the risk that will be associated and make a decision of whether to engage them or not. Other assessment that you must have commonly heard is vulnerability assessment. So you use vulnerability scanning tools, penetration testing to discover and identify vulnerabilities, and then based on the risk score provided, you prioritize which vulnerabilities need to be mitigated. It's basically a way to defend your organization against vulnerabilities. Cybersecurity assessment. This is to identify cyber risk within the organization, and it may become a mandatory uh, provision in the state of California for all publicly traded company under California Privacy Protection Act. This requirement is still in draft since 2023, but it will be interesting to see how it progresses in terms of making it a mandate for publicly traded companies. Now, coming to security compliance assessment, it essentially is a way to evaluate and verify if organizations have guardrails or safeguarding measures in place that enable business to meet the technical requirements that are stated in regulation, standard, or internal policy. Now, the big question that comes is, how is it done? So let's break this term security compliance assessment into two components. First is compliance mapping, that is establishing and mapping the compliance requirements based on the regulation. And the second part is testing the guardrails, that is security controls. So it's a combination of establishing and verifying. Now in upcoming slide, we'll dive into how these two parts are done, that is compliance mapping and testing of the security controls. So compliance mapping. What do you mean by compliance mapping? So the easy peasy approach of doing this is based on your organization business, gather all the regulation and standards that are applicable. When it comes to determining between regulation and standard, regulation takes precedence because it's a law, while standards are giving you guidelines on how you can achieve a golden state. So between regulation and standard, always give preference to the regulation. Uh, Regulation usually have requirements which are not very prescriptive, but if you're not following it, it can lead to significant fines and penalties. So in short, requirements tell tell you what to do, but they do not do a great job of telling us how to do it. So that's where we have to make sure that we have controls as a means or way to meet those requirements. So going by compliance mapping, it means gather all the regulation and industry standards that are applicable to your business. Some common examples are HIPAA, that's for healthcare, PCID triple S, which is for standard double S, sorry, ISO, which is again a standard, and it's industry agnostic, so any industry can basically go for it. GDPR, which is a privacy law for handling personal data for European resident. NIST is again a cybersecurity framework. It's a good starting point to get a security posture of your organization. Again, it's not a regulation, it's a standard. But if you want to start somewhere, NIST is one of the best mechanism to get an idea of security posture. Now, moving on to the next thing. So, what is compliance mapping? How is it done? That's one of the things that is not talked about. So, this is an example of a requirement. This is a blurb from HIPAA. HIPAA is a regulation. I basically picked up a blurb from it and just pasted over here. I understand it's not something very easy to digest, but you have to break it down. Like, under HIPAA, what is it talking about? Maintain audit logs. These audit logs should track access. It requires them to retain logs for 6 years. So you have to look at the keywords that are there in the blurb. So the way I go with it is I take one sentence until the last sentence ends with a period. So I took the first three lines, try to make sense of it, and developed control on it, which is organization logs critical information system activity. Because we are considering that we are doing this for a healthcare organization. I didn't get into defining what critical information system activities over here. Control should be something which is very specific. Now, another example. I went through the second sentence. These audit logs should track access modification and other activities related to EPHI. What does that mean? That they should have monitoring mechanisms in place to detect tampering with audit logging and monitoring tools for critical information system. So you have to break it down in a way where it specifies what conditions are you supposed to meet. Now that we have regulation and controls built out of it, the second part of security compliance assessment is testing out those controls. So I have just developed an example over here to give you an idea of how security controls are to be tested. It is almost like doing an experiment. So you write test procedures for the control to determine their effectiveness. I'll take a previous examples, which is organization logs critical information system activity. Now, how will you come up with writing a procedure for it? First, you'll think about, okay, is there a policy in place which dictates how logging requirements are supposed to be met? Have logging does that even exist? The second part will be to determine, once you have a policy, go through the configuration to determine if they meet your requirement. That is either in the regulation or in the policy. So it's almost like you're trying to poke holes to see where things can go wrong. Moving on, I'm just going to recap because it can be a lot of information if a person who doesn't know about security compliance assessment and is walking into it. So I'll just recap. Security compliance assessment, there are two parts to it. First part is compliance, that is determining what regulation standard apply to you, extracting those requirements, creating controls out of it. Second part is ways to test them, and then you gather evidence to ensure that risk associated with that control can be recreated or presented to support if there are any gaps. If there are no gaps, well and good, but always make sure that when you perform a test, you are also gathering evidence associated with it. Now I'll move on to the next part of the slide. Oops, I'm sorry. I spoke, but I didn't change my slide. So There's another poll question that I'll be launching. Uh, just give me a second before I start the second poll question. I know this one is too much to read, but it's a very uh, simple thing. You need to identify whether this is a requirement or security control. We already discussed about what is a requirement and what is a security control. So this would be a good test for the audience to uh, test themselves and see whether they understand what is or are able to distinguish between requirement and security control. So I'll just keep the poll on for another 10 seconds or 20 seconds because it's too much information to read. Okay, I'll close the poll and I'll check. And the correct answer for this is it's a requirement because this is something which comes straight out of the law. This is definitely a requirement. This is from Article 33 in GDPR about data breach notification. And you can clearly see the way the wording has been aligned. It calls out that this is a law, and when it is a law, it becomes a requirement. Now, I'll start with my second poll question. Read it and let me know if you are able to understand this as a requirement or a security control. Let me launch the poll. I'll just wait for another 10 seconds just in case people need some time to vote. All right, I'll close poll. And I didn't realize that there's a way to present the result. I'll just present the result and see if you are able to see it. Ooh, everyone answered it correctly. Uh, I'm impressed that people are listening to it. Yes, this is a control, and encryption is something very much prescribed in each of the laws and mandates that you see. All right, now that we have understood what is security compliance assessment, we clearly know to identify between the requirements, compliance mapping, and then coming to the security assessment. So the next big question is how many data security regulation standards slash framework exist? Anyone wants to take a guess? I could not find an inventory which could clearly spit out and say that these are the number of data security regulation standards or framework that exist globally. It's totally depending on your business that you have to keep up with. For example, ISO 2700 series, it has 45 standards, but the most popular one are 2701 and 2702. So there are multiple regulations, standards that are applicable globally and locally. Now, how can you make sure that all these frameworks, regulations, standard, while they can't fit into one box, but you can develop a process of optimization? And that's what we are going to discuss in the next slide. The answer to the optimization is common control framework. What exactly is common control framework and how can you use it and how can you build it is what we are going to discuss in the next upcoming session. So common control framework, which is also known as unified compliance framework, it's a comprehensive solution which provides a structured set of internal security controls which are derived from various security framework. You can consider this as a one-stop shop which consolidates and harmonizes all the control measures from various regulation and standards into a single framework. It provides a centralized repository, centralized resource for assessing and implementing controls. It helps you streamline compliance effort, ensures that there is consistency and adherence to the multiple requirements. Basically, this approach helps you minimize redundancy, reduces compliance fatigue, which is basically more of a burden to the engineering teams. And if you want to make sure that you are optimizing their time, it's good to use common control framework. It facilitates a more efficient and comprehensive approach to risk management and regulatory compliance. So where is it useful? So I've just listed down what are the benefits of it. For example, if you're a data analytics company and you have customers ranging from manufacturing to financial to healthcare, in such scenario it makes sense to have a common control framework which will help your organization meet majority of the standards or regulations that are applicable to you, so that you can better serve your customers and of course expand the business. So moving on to the next slide is, why is it important? First of all, it helps you with assessment optimization. You optimize security compliance assessment using different regulation. You're not doing one ISO assessment, one PCI assessment, one HIPAA assessment. Basically, you're trying to optimize as much as possible, reuse the evidence, repurpose the controls that are already applicable to all three regulations or n number of regulations or standards that are applicable to you. Essentially, they provide a baseline control, which is a good head start for an organization to build more robust security controls and gives a visibility into security posture. Other thing is it eliminates assessment fatigue. You are not again going to your engineering team and re-asking for the same set of questionnaires, same set of evidence, same thing back and forth. It's more of helping you streamline your efforts. So it promotes efficiency because you are aggregating all the control requirements, correlating them, rationalizing them, and this will help your organization accelerate in achieving their security compliance goal. Now, the next thing is, how do you build a common compliance framework? It's not an easy experiment, but essentially it's about gathering all the requirements that you have and what goes into rationalization. It's almost like a filter and you get a set of common security control. Now, what are the rationalization principles that you can apply? First is prioritizing regulation over standards. It's a must that you prioritize regulation because they are law and you're obligated to follow them. Now, second part is identifying commonalities. So look for overlapping requirements across different regulation. For example, both GDPR and CCPA have requirements for data breach notification. How can you figure out a way of consolidating them into a single control? Look further. So GDPR mandates 72 hours of data breach notification, while CCPA has no clear timeline prescribed in their law. It says without unreasonable delay. So if I have to build a control around data breach notification, I will pick GDPR since it is more specific and has a high bar as compared to CCPA. Now, the third thing is assessing the risk impact. What does that mean? Prioritize controls based on the risk ranking that is being used, based on the risk they carry to your organization and a potential impact of non compliance. For example, a control related to encryption might be given higher priority due to its critical role in protecting sensitive data as compared to a regular software patching and vulnerability management. Both are extremely critical, but you have to evaluate the consequences of control failing. It's like ranking the risk. If this particular if this particular risk is not mitigated, we are failing this control, and as a result of these, this is going to be the consequences. You can create your risk prioritization matrix. There are a lot of different methods of doing it, but make sure that you're assessing the risk impact when it comes to building common control framework. Fourth thing, I it's not something that you need to go sequentially. I know I'm saying first thing, second thing, fourth thing, but it's more of giving you a tool or guidance when you are applying your rationalization. Is consider business context. So tailor controls which are more specific to your organization. What is the risk appetite? For example, if you're a financial institution, PCI is something which is mandatory. If you are because you're monitoring a transaction, then you are going to need PCI in place. If you're a healthcare, you're going to need HIPAA. So you have to prioritize which of the controls make sense, which customers are more inclined to using our product. And next thing is leveraging existing controls. So if you have already controls in place that are effective, use them, minimize duplication of effort. That you can get from internal policies. So make sure that your internal policies are somewhere aligning with the standard and requirements. So basically what you're doing is you're not building the controls from scratch. You have a you have a baseline to work with, and you are basically doing verification and evidence work for determining the common control framework compliance. And last thing is stay agile because there is constantly something new coming up. You have to regularly review your controls, revise controls. It's not like one time you build a common control framework. It's not a formula that, okay, it's done. I don't need to revisit it. Make sure that you're revisiting it annually, if not quarterly. Annually is must. Get all the stakeholders aligned, get sign off from them that, okay, this is something which is still eligible. Nothing has been changed in terms of requirement. Once you apply all these rationalization effort, what you get is common security controls. So just I'm reiterating what on the rationalization principle: prioritize regulation over standard, identify commonalities, which means if there are overlapping controls, identify them, assess the risk impact, risk ranking which control is absolutely necessary, must haves, and which one are nice to have. Other thing that you need to consider is business context. Does the control meet the business expectation? Is it helping our business grow, or is it just an unnecessary overhead? Last thing is, sorry, leverage existing controls. So if you already have internal compliance program that are being used by your organization, leverage the controls from them to add value to your customer and company. So I have talked so much about the benefits that common control framework has. Pretty sure there'll be some limitation. There can't be just pros to everything. So while CCF provides a pathway to optimize and develop security controls that align with our business need, it does have some pitfalls which need time to time attention before they become unmanageable or Frankenstein monster. So we'll get into what are they and what are the limitations associated with it. So one of the crazy limitation or that is associated with common control framework is merger and acquisition. This is the situation where it is not that useful using it, because if you're acquiring a company or you're going to merge into it, there are going to be uh, some knowledge transfer and some transition, some technology gap, which will not help you meet the goals of common compliance framework. Next thing is regulation and geographical disparity. So something that is more applicable to UK, it's not necessary that it will be applicable to Korea. So those are the things that you need to take into consideration. Company culture. This is one of the most, I feel, biggest hurdle out of all, because it involves a lot of cat herding, and fostering the mindset of security culture is a long walk. So you may have to take steps like gamification, have awareness drive, a session to bring people on board. It's very difficult uh, to bring everyone on board and make convince them on using common control framework. Again, ever evolving landscape, as I spoke about it, like there are constantly new regulation or standard coming up. While there are overlapping contexts, there might be distinct requirements too. So staying on top of it is must. Few ways of doing it is to subscribe to newsletters related to it, or get heavily involved in networking, talk to people who are already expert in in this field, join think tanks. These are the ways to keep yourself updated with what is happening in the regulatory landscape. Now that we have understood common control framework and I spoke about it, now comes the poll question. So I will move on to the poll question. Here you can see I have listed three requirements from different standards. They're not regulation, they're standard. What I'm sorry, I didn't launch my poll question. Let me launch my poll question. So I totally forgot to launch my poll question. 1 second. So take your time. This one is slightly loads of information to consume. So identify the commonality and choose the correct option that closely aligns with requirement. There is nothing right or wrong in it. It's more of, well, some of the options are clearly calling out that this does not fit in over here, but try to figure out which option mostly suits in this particular situation. And I've opened the poll, so please take your time to answer it. Okay. Right, I'll close poll and let's see. I'm just presenting the result. People are able to see the result. When I say present the result, I I'm not able to guess if people are able to see the result. So it's processing poll results, and let's see what would be the outcome of it. Okay. So I see majority people have answered security and logging. So let me go back and see what is the right answer for it. What do you think is the right answer? I am sorry, I have two options over here. I was not sure if the polling would work, and I added last minute 4 options. So it is system monitoring and logging, and I believe that that's the one that the audience chose, or it was, I think it was security and logging that got the majority. Monitoring and logging, if you read clearly at the requirement, it there's a heavy emphasis on track and monitor, event logging, monitor and respond. So look at those keywords that are calling out. Okay, tracking and monitoring. I know there's no right or wrong answer. It fits into two buckets. But if I have to be more specific, because we were trying to choose the one that aligns more with the requirement. So it is system monitoring and logging. So moving on to the next poll question, it is, so I have listed the requirements over here. And based on this, you have to use high watermark strategy, which is there are requirements listed from different standards. Which out of the three do you feel has high watermark? And which one aligns in more in terms of mitigating the risk? So I'll launch my poll question. Just wait for another 10 seconds. Okay, so I'll close poll. It's processing result. Still processing. Oh, we got 100%. Everyone answered it right, which is a good thing. So you understood the technique of high watermark, because if you look at PCI, it says perform quarterly internal vulnerability scan. SOC, it is saying identify and assess risk related to vulnerabilities. ISO is like manage your technical vulnerabilities. So if you have to go with high watermark, of course you'll go with PCI. If you have a organization which has financial institutions or companies that provide uh, or are into fintech industry, I should say, and if you have companies that are into manufacturing, and you have clients that are into manufacturing, so you will go with the requirements that is listed in PCI, that you are performing quarterly, so that you are covering both the territories at the same time. So that's a good thing that I got the correct answer from the audience. Thank you so much. So now that you have understood what common control framework is, I just want to conclude with saying that you don't need to start common control framework from scratch. There are plenty of open source options that are available, and the two open source options that I really look up to is, one is Cisco common control framework for cloud security, and other is Adobe. Adobe has done a very good job of listing. I think they have more than 127 controls listed across 10 to 20 different regulation and standard, and it's been broken down with domain, the control risk, which regulation you're meeting, and then additionally they have given you test procedures on how you can test it to make sure that that control is being met for particular standard, what evidence should be looking for. So rather than starting from scratch, it's better to use something which has already been built and then tailor it according to your business needs. Other thing is join think tank to begin your contribution. There are a lot of think tanks who are coming up to build common control framework that they can uh, basically give it to startups or big companies or trying to build a golden standard for it. If you look for common control think tanks, you will definitely come up with some links. Think of contributing over there. Apply rationalization principles that I already spoke about. And here is my contact information. If you have any question, email me. I also have my LinkedIn profile on the slides. Uh, that's all I have in my conclusion to say. Thank you so much for listening to me, and thank you, Day of Security, for providing me this opportunity to present my point of view for Common Control Framework. I can open my session for Q&A, so if anyone has any question, uh, please feel free to unmute or raise your hand. I'll stop my screen share for now.